Mike, check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K collector. Did the Nintendo Switch change handheld gaming forever? I think in some ways yes, and in some ways no. Now, I feel like I have a unique perspective on this because the very first system that I ever got as a kid was an original Game Boy back in 1993. And the original Game Boy was my only system for probably I want to say maybe 3 to 4 years. I was consistently playing the original Game Boy until like around the late 90s. I wound up actually getting a Game Boy Color and then SP. And, from there, it kind of just went. I never wound up getting games, consoles like a PSP or a Vita until I was much older. But I remember back then, handheld gaming felt very separate from console gaming. Handheld gaming was like a world um, all on its own. And I think that a lot of the consoles that we have now, whether it be the Nintendo Switch or even like with the PlayStation Portal, there's always some type of tethering or ability for you to either dock it so that you can play it on a big screen TV or so that you can cast it. There's always some connection that you have between a lot of the handhelds that we see today and their connection to their console counterparts. It's not like back in the day where the handhelds were standalone. There really wasn't any way to connect them. Now, don't get me wrong, there were little trinkets that allowed you to play some of these handheld games on big screens. You obviously had the Super Game Boy, which allowed you to play Game Boy games on a big screen TV. When it came to the Game Boy Advance, you also had the Game Boy Player, which allowed you to connect your Game Boy Advance to your GameCube, I believe, for certain games that had that functionality and ability, and you could kind of use your Game Boy Advance to play games through the GameCube and on the Game Boy Player. So there were some really cool innovations that were around back then. But again, the handheld experience just felt definitely separated, and uh, it was just a distinct feel from anything that you would have experienced on a console. And I think that a lot of the games that we saw on handhelds were just timeless. I mean, classic games that just cannot be replaced, can't be duplicated. And now we're starting to see remasters of them. When you think about, Castlevania Advance Collection, or you think about, even just a lot of the Mario games that were available, the Wario games that were available. It just seems like there was just much more of a distinction with the handheld games that we had back in the day and the handheld experience. Now, it wasn't all good. These screens are some of the worst screens to play video games on. I mean, I'll be quite honest with you. You will ruin your eyesight trying to play a handheld game on this Game Boy screen. I mean, you'd have to have the light in the room at maximum level for you to be able to see anything that's going on that screen. And it was the same thing for the Game Boy Color, right? Granted, yes, did it have color? And could you play games in color? Yeah, that was cool. But without light, I mean, it was a very rough experience. It wasn't until we wound up getting the Advanced SP that we were able to kind of get a better visual experience when playing games. And I just think that, looking at that change when it comes to just the advancement in technology, it definitely makes playing some of these handheld games much more comfortable. But I feel like there's a reason why many people still pay a lot of money for, things like an SP. I mean, SPs are still selling even you know, the one that does not have the backlit. You have the AGS 001, obviously, and then you have the AGS 101. The 101 still commands a pretty penny. I think you can still, I think they're still trying to sell AGS 101s for about $100. If it's in good condition, you might be looking at 120 to 125. For a 001, I mean, you're gonna be looking at anywhere between 60 and $75. So that's still a good, that's a considerable amount for, a handheld console that only can play, Game Boy Advance games. But there's a reason for it. And I think it goes back to the experience and a lot of the games that we saw on these handheld consoles that just have not been recreated on any other platform. A lot of games have been brought to the Switch. My screen is horrible. I need to clean that screen. I haven't played this Switch in a long time. I normally play my full-fledged Switch. I don't know how to say it, but the one that you can dock. I normally play that one. I haven't played this one in a while. I actually gave this one to my daughter, and I think she messed up this analog. There's a lot of drift on this. So, I mean, I still use it from time to time, but I digress. I don't think that, the introduction of the Switch necessarily killed handhelds, because I think these will always have their place in retro gaming, and I think people will always go back to those handheld systems and handheld consoles. But I do think that, the Switch has changed the game. And we're seeing a lot of these emulation devices, these handheld emulation devices, that are allowing people to play not only Game Boy games and Game Gear games. They're being able to play PlayStation, N64 with a lot of those handheld emulation devices. There's a lot that you can do. Now, do I think that there is still a market for this type of handheld gaming? I want to say possibly, because we're seeing companies try to create devices that kind of go back to this era of handheld systems that have their own distinct cartridges and their own distinct games, for them. I know GameStop, they came out with, or either they came out with it or they're coming out with their own handheld console. I can't remember the name of it, but that console uses its own cartridges. They're coming out with their own games for it, and I don't know how successful that handheld device is going to be, but they're definitely putting a lot of energy and money behind it to kind of make it an actual thing. And that kind of just tells me that yes, there is still a market for that type of retro handheld gaming. And despite all of the good stuff that the Switch brings, in terms of like picture quality, being able to play Switch games and all the way down to Nintendo, Super Nintendo games, all the different games that have been ported to the console, nothing can replace the tactile feel of holding some of these older handheld devices that kind of give you that retro handheld experience. There's just some things that just cannot be replaced. And I don't think the Switch has completely annihilated the handheld gaming market. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. I know for a lot of people, once they got a Switch, all of these types of handhelds became irrelevant. No one was using them. People were probably just moved on to other devices and stopped even caring about them. Me, these are three handhelds that I will never sell out of my collection. Especially the original Game Boy, a ton of sentimental value, a ton of nostalgia built up in this console. This is where I first discovered Pokemon Blue. Yes, I did not have the red. I know a lot of people say the blue was the easier one to get, but I started off with Pokemon Blue. I remember playing it here. I remember getting the Game Boy Color and playing a bunch of games on the Game Boy Color. And I don't have it here, but I even remember the Neo Geo Pocket Color. That was one that not a lot of people knew about, but the Neo Geo Pocket Color was also like a system really ahead of its time in a lot of ways. But I think it was one that definitely deserves its own credit. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Did the Switch completely just take out the handheld gaming market? I'm interested to know your thoughts. It's the Y2K Collector. I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.